What's up, everybody? I'm Levi Brickley, your host with the Pursuing Truth podcast. I'm down here in Dallas, Fort Worth area. I know that people get offended in Fort Worth when I call it Dallas or whatever, but it's the same to me. They're just like 45 minutes away from each other. Anyway, so yesterday we did a podcast, teamed up with the Purple Pill podcast in Dallas. Literally, dude. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but man, I was a little bit scared. It was in the ghetto, like deep down in the ghetto. Mm-hmm. And but you know, I'm like, hey, I live life on the edge, yo. I've heard that when you go to the ghetto, like you can get the best haircuts. So, you know, good, there's a barbershop right there. Man, this dude's out there with the straight edge razor, like getting up underneath my chin and everything. And he's like working on my fade so hard and heavy, man. I was like, this is freaking awesome. We don't have that kind of treatment in Kansas. So I think anytime I need a haircut, I'm coming back to Dallas, damn it. And I'm going back to the same guy. Anyways, so today I have Nathan Overholt.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, cool. I got it. Yes. Boom. I'm a winner. So anyways, we're going to be talking about men's mental health today. I'm not a clinical psychologist, don't really have any background besides my own personal experiences with mental health as a man and my personal challenges. But Nathan, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself and kind of like what you do.
Yeah, I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm working on my bachelor's degree in psychology at TCU, and I hope to be a clinical psychologist one day. So.
Okay. What made you want to get into that?
I guess my experiences, I think really during COVID, I read about so many mental illnesses on the rise, and I saw kind of the effects that seclusion had on people. And there's been other numerous experiences that just drew me to that field, I guess. One of them, I think, is drug treatment with children, especially like ADHD. I don't know. I know a lot of people or have family who takes those medications like Adderall and things. I think it's a little harsh for children. Anyway, situations like that have inspired me to work on things like that.
I think psychology is extremely fascinating because there's like so much to life, and especially in today's culture, we see a culture that looks at things very, very surface level. And as a person, like I've always wanted to understand everything around me. So like psychology like gives me some of that understanding, you know, why is this person looking at me this way? Have you ever struggled with mental health?
Absolutely. I think my hardest times kind of came during that COVID, being in lockdown and everything. I had some major life changes, I guess. I moved from Oregon to Texas, and being away from family, being away from friends that I'd grown up with my whole life, I definitely had some problems, and therapy has been huge for me. Coming out of, I guess, there was no diagnosis or anything, but probably some like mild depression and anxiety problems. And so, yeah, I've seen some things that can help. And then the things that I've read about and hopefully we'll be working on here soon in a lab are designed to make some new cutting edge technologies to treat the brain, I guess, the way you would treat any other sort of injury. And really, if you break it down, what's going on in the brain, we don't understand it well enough yet, but we could hopefully treat it just like you would treat a broken arm or a broken leg.
Right.
Just
with a pill.
Hopefully not a pill. They're kind of moving away from that in a lot of ways. One of the new techniques they use is it's called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And so what's going on in the brain is neurons are firing all the time. It's all electrical signals. And lots of times with depression or other disorders, there's a very predictable way that parts of the brain fire out of sync, I guess. And we can stimulate those signals from outside of the head. It sounds pretty like sci-fi crazy, but they're actually using this to treat depression and anxiety, especially extreme depression.
Which is good. Like I'll use an example here, like benzodiazepines, the antidepressants, oftentimes can lead to an addiction, or not so much necessarily, I guess, an addiction as much as a dependency, that your body becomes dependent on it. And so like when you get off of it, it's like an alcohol withdrawal as an alcoholic. Like you're more depressed without it than you were even before you ever started taking it. And I find that fascinating because like medications, I feel like our culture is overly medicated oftentimes, right? And especially with like like me, I went through 9 months of like severe depression, dude. I didn't want to get up. I'd just lay in my bed. I'd cry all day. I didn't want to go into work. I was unmotivated, dissatisfied with everything. I couldn't go to a family event and actually find the joy in the moment. Oh. And like, those were like telltale signs of like, you're in a dark place right now, you know? And what I found was I ended up going to a therapist, and I went to 3 sessions, and I'm explaining my story, like what's going on inside of me. And immediately he diagnoses me with like some detachment disorder.
Okay.
And I immediately looked at him, and, you know, a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but I immediately looked at him and I was like, dude, I'm not a victim to anything. Like, I don't have this disorder, and I'm not going to allow that to be something that I accept just because I have a human condition that I want relationship.
Sure.
And that's what I was struggling with, was that I didn't have a real quality relationship with somebody. You know, you, especially, you know, I can only imagine in the early 20s, right, is that you have all these friends around you and you're struggling with things, but nobody has processed their reason or meaning in life. And so because they haven't processed that, like, how are you supposed to hold a conversation with them about those things that are really meaningful to make them be essentially exposed to the reasons why they're feeling the way they are? And I really think, you know, I said it last night on the Purple Pill podcast, was that sometimes our best therapist is a friend.
Absolutely. Yeah. Helpers can be anybody for sure. It doesn't have to be someone that's licensed too. So it sounds like you thought it wasn't really a problem you had. It was just part of the human experience.
Yeah. And I'm all for it. And the thing is, I'm all for going to therapy.
Sure.
But I think too that depression has been overly diagnosed, right? That, yeah, there's this human condition, and yes, the feelings are very valid, and you may have this momentary feeling of depression, and maybe your depression lasts 4 years, you know, especially like you said, you moved from Oregon. Maybe that depression lasts 5 years as you're adjusting to a completely new lifestyle, and 2 years from now, you have no clue where your life is going to take you. And so I think there's always that like little bit of anxiety for the future and what it holds for you. I don't know, like,
yeah, so with depression, I agree with you. And it's actually a big debate in well, I don't know if it's a big debate. It's kind of the more, it's the not as popular opinion, but that labels are bad for people. So like putting a label on everything that's wrong with you, it makes you think there's something wrong with you, and maybe it's just something you're overcoming. That's a natural part of life. But they do put levels to different disorders. So like depression has a less severe form called, I think, dysthymia, and that's just like kind of when you're sad all the time, but not really extreme depressive or major depressive disorder. And I think the folks with major depressive disorder, they have measurable things going on in their brains that make them resistant to therapy or to help or things like that. And so that's where a more extreme thing, like what I was talking about earlier, the magnetic stimulation, that might be used for someone like that. But I totally agree that I don't know where exactly I stand on it, but labels definitely aren't good for everybody. And one thing it does do is it allows insurance to pay for a lot of things, same way it would for, so it's kind of a game you got to play, I guess. But,
so that was my thing. I mean, and that was a conversation I had with the psychologist. Was it honestly irritated me, because I was like, well, that's the reason why everybody has a problem, right? Everybody's a victim to a problem because the insurance company is like, hey, we need a diagnosis in order to pay for this need that this person has. And it's like, no, sometimes like you just want a person to talk to. Sure. And that's what a therapist to me is like.
They're problem solvers, I guess, in my view.
Yeah, and you know, they look at it from a subjective point of view that's not involved in your life day to day, and it's your explanation and articulation of the things that are going on in your life. So essentially, your therapist is only as good as you are willing to open up about. I mean, you look at a movie like Good Will Hunting, right? Like it took him X amount of time throughout that movie to get to the point where he was going to be open with,
what's his name? He passed away recently.
Robin Williams. Yeah.
No, that's a very good point. And I have a class right now that's psychology of counseling, and they talk about how it takes the counselor in a sense being vulnerable in order to get their client to be vulnerable a lot of times. And absolutely it's on both the client and the patient. But yeah, going back to that, what you're talking about with everyone's got a victim or a problem of something. Yeah, I think that could be, we at least need the labels for the therapist to be able to treat them. It kind of gives a roadmap. They have the
Yeah,
DSM-5, and so there's these definitions and recommendations for treatment. But I would agree. It doesn't necessarily need to be shared with the patient all the time that they have.
Yeah, because professionally, you need to know what the problem is. Like it's like, he has that one thing that we know in the back of our head is cancer, but we don't want to tell him he has cancer. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't want that. Like, the professional's got to know what it is. Everybody on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe, like this video if you're enjoying this so far. And yeah, give us a rating and review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. It will help us grow. What's up?
All right, first question.
Yeah, go.
November is Men's Mental Health Month. So can you guys speak on the stigma about men showing vulnerable emotions?
Well, yeah, personally, I think it's a huge problem. And we see men are more often diagnosed with more violent personality disorders, and women more so with mood disorders like depression or anxiety. But more and more, we're finding that men are becoming more and more diagnosed with the mood disorders, anxiety, and depression, as that I think is becoming more normalized for men to be vulnerable and to talk about their problems and to seek out help. And I think that really the difference in diagnosis isn't that women are more prevalent with depression or anxiety. It's just that men have a harder time seeking out help. So hopefully that number continues to rise and more people can find the treatment they need.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I have very weird views that are not normal at all for anybody in this culture to have. And my view of vulnerability is like, it's our unwillingness to be 100% authentic with people around us because we're fearful that they'll judge us and basically look at us as an idiot. Like, why is this person emotional? Whatever. And I think like there's a point that a person can get to where there's so much internal confidence that it's not so much about me being vulnerable. Like, dude, I had thoughts of suicide. Like, to me, I don't look at that as me being vulnerable. I look at that as it's a story of overcoming, and I'm completely confident sharing it because I know that there's people that need to hear about it.
Yeah.
And dude, there's times I get on TikTok live and I'm sitting there crying. Like, I'm a human being, and I want people to see that we're all human beings and that it's okay.
Yeah.
And
it's important.
And so like, when I hear vulnerability, I mean, I'll go with the stigma. Like, I think of weakness when I hear vulnerability because that's truly what it's in its word. Like, vulnerability is weakness, period, dot. So I don't really like to use vulnerability as much as it is authenticity. Okay. We don't have enough authenticity in this culture.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with that. And I don't think social media helps. I think that a lot of people have there's a figure that we're all chasing, we're all trying to be, and it's something that's promoted. I don't know exactly how, but it seems like there is something pushing a certain sort of image, a certain sort of lifestyle that we're all trying to imitate, and it absolutely does take away authenticity. And I don't think it's making us any happier. You know, it used to be just celebrities like on tabloid magazines that were being overexposed, and now we're doing that to ourselves. Yeah. And it's always been a problem for the people at the top, and now it's the entire population. So right. I can only, I'm guessing, the mental health problems. And
if you look at like a historical cultural shift, look at Elvis, dude. Like, the guy was up on stage and he's swinging his hips, and like all the moms and dads at the time, while their young daughters watching this dude that's extremely attractive, like. They're mad about it. But now we're able to be freaking Elvis on our social media accounts, right?
And a whole lot more.
And a whole lot more, right? Like I think here's the thing. I'm a TikTok creator. You know, I have over 35,000 followers across my platforms, and it is awesome. But one thing I do not do, and I refuse to do, is I do not scroll through it. Because what I start doing is I start comparing myself to everybody else around me, and I can't hone in on what I'm gifted with.
Yeah.
And so I had to like take a break from watching other people. And now I want to listen to the best people at the craft that I'm trying to perfect in myself.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to like people like Jordan Peterson,
That's a great one.
Ryan Mickler. I don't know if you know him, Order of Man podcast, Jocko Willings.
Sure.
And then if you want to get into the religious side, I do Bible Thinker with Mike Winger in in San Diego. And so like I pull from those guys so that I can perfect the craft here. But if I'm like watching a video on TikTok, I'm like, oh, my quality's not that good.
Yeah.
The things I said weren't as well put. as them. And then I'm like, am I adequate for this? And then so I don't feel equipped to get behind the microphone and have a real conversation.
Yeah.
And then so taking a break from it, and I think this is what everybody can take from it, because it's not just TikTok, it's also Instagram, it's Facebook, whatever. Maybe it's the girl that feels like she doesn't have a nice enough body because this other girl has a phenomenal body.
You could never have nice enough on Instagram, right? Someone's going to edit it better or whatever it is, sure.
Absolutely.
So this one's for Nathan. Nathan doesn't have any social media. Do you think that improves your mental health?
In my personal experience, absolutely. It was a huge marked change when I deleted all social media accounts. And that was kind of soon after I left high school, and for the same sort of reasons, but just in more of a general life sense, I guess. I was playing sports. I was comparing myself to other athletes, to just how other people looked. And beyond that, I got over that, I would say, for the most part. But just the time suck in general, I just couldn't stop. Like it took away from things that were much more important. And I think what you said, seems like you're very deliberate with how you use social media, which I think is the best way you could possibly use it, because it absolutely is a great tool. Yeah, you have access to things that smart people like Jordan Peterson and Jocko, who we'd never be able to talk to or listen to otherwise. So in a sense, it can be really helpful. But when you're deliberate, and I guess not having social media and not being on it constantly, when I do go to YouTube or Spotify to listen to something, it typically is more deliberate. And I think that's helpful for me.
Yeah. Because I honestly, I can't imagine what it's like to be a woman.
It would be.
In today's world, I can't imagine. And I think really, when I look at mental health from a man's point of view, the biggest struggle within a man is the way he views himself. When he walks in a room, does he feel like he owns the room? A lot of men would say yes to that. Maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, they're like, yeah, I own the room, dude. Mm-hmm. And so there's ego.
Absolutely.
And ego, in my opinion, is our enemy. Like, I think this is the aspect of the Christian walk that a lot of people really don't understand is being dead to flesh. Is like, I can walk into a room and I don't have to own the room. I can just be me. It doesn't change anything. And, I get this all the time, but I will talk about this because there are so many people that just want to point fingers. And I just got a message yesterday about, I said something that somebody didn't like, don't show them the videos of you being down at the stockyards in Fort Worth, doing this, doing that, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, guys, I'm a real person. Like, I have my evil and malevolence inside of me just as much as anybody. And me being raw and authentic is partly showing that. Yeah. Is that I am not perfect. And then so people hear me talk about Jesus and this and that. Like, no wonder there's nobody that wants to go to church, because everybody inside and outside the church are like, yo, he says that he loves Jesus and he's doing this. Yeah. But then they'll point a finger at somebody and say, oh, well, you don't agree with abortion. And I'm not trying to get into that topic, but oh, you don't agree with abortion, or oh, you don't agree with homosexuality or this or that. Sure. Like, and they'll say, oh, well, you're a piece of crap. So are you not just as much a hypocrite as you claim that the Christian is in that situation? Absolutely. Yeah. So the reality is that's a sense of ego, right? Is that everybody's holding themselves, at least have an image of themselves better than other people around them. Mm-hmm. And they fail to realize and have the awareness that, no, I'm not any better than this dude next to me. Yeah. And I think once you do that, once you're able to set yourself completely aside, you're able just to sit down with somebody and have like a random, really good conversation. Absolutely. Where it's like I said, that friend is the therapist. And you're able to set all of that, oh, I got to look like the best man in the room aside. Absolutely. And now just be like, yo, dude, I'm your brother, man. I'm here for you. Yeah. And that's what men need. The number one thing that men need is encouragement in this culture. Yeah. Because we don't get enough of it. We're told how to live our lives, what to do, how to think, how to believe, what not to say, and what to say. And I think that, there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me on this. But I think that women have some more freedom in some things and the way that they can talk about certain aspects of life. Now, there are gender roles in communication. I truly do believe in gender roles as communication. Like, I would never go to my sister or my niece and talk about, you know, what it's like to be on the period, you know? I don't know what that's like. I have no clue. And like I said, I can only imagine what that's like. Yeah. So we want to understand everybody around us. It starts with actively listening and asking good quality questions.
Yeah.
And developing the relationships.
Yeah. And I think even before that, what you were saying is like the ego death part. You got to kind of conquer yourself and your own insecurities before you can really receive information openly, because those are the people that are quick to shut off a conversation, are the people who are insecure about something, or just unable to communicate because of that. And I think that kind of happens in the church too. It's like, or even outside of it, it doesn't really matter. I'm agnostic, so I think anything. Like my family is very religious. Most of my friends are Christian, and I actually study the Bible quite a bit with them. But the people that I choose to associate with are people who are very confident in themselves and are able to talk about anything openly without being offended by anything. And those people are also the most confident people I know. So I think that's the beginning to being able to have this sort of open dialogue.
I think too, you know, because I've been told you're very arrogant, you're overly confident, you're this, you're that. And dude, when I hear that, I'm like, there's a huge difference between confidence and arrogance. Huge difference. Absolutely. Arrogance says I'm better than you. Confidence says I own who I am.
Absolutely. That's a very good way to put it.
And I'm completely content with who I am. Dude, man, like the homeless dude on the street last night. Like, hey, man, I'll give you $5 if you let me play guitar with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Not worried about how you're perceived.
Yeah, I don't care. There's a group sitting around me. Dude, I'm in Fort. Like, here's the thing about traveling that I love, and I think like this is what, when you're in a rut, one thing you need to do is travel. And I'll give a couple instances of why. The first time I came down here to Fort Worth, Annalise was in her sophomore year of college, and I had recently went through a breakup. And at the time, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm so happy to be where I'm at right now, right? And, like, I'm in a good place, you know? I'm a free man, free Willie. I'm going to go down to Fort Worth and have a good time, maybe find a lady, because I was in that mindset at that time. And I come down here, Annalise is like, I got a ruck at like 5 a.m, so you're going to have to find something to do for the night. There's a bar across the street if you'd like to go there. And I went to that bar, right? And I'm just slamming drinks, dude, left and right, man. Just Crown and Coke, owning the pool table. And like, I'm just having the time of my life engaging with these people that I know I'll never meet again. Yeah. And I start talking to this girl. And I'm like, oh, okay, now it's time. I'm going to get lucky, right? And I'm sitting there, we're talking for like 30, 45 minutes, and I look down at her hand. Boom, there's a ring. And I'm like, man, I don't have that kind of character. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so I got up and I walked out, didn't even say anything to anybody. And once I got back to Annalise's apartment and I went to bed, I just laid there like all night, dude, like crying, you know, like, what the hell am I doing at 26 in Fort Worth at a bar across the street from the TCU campus, talking to people that I'll never meet again, trying to feel some sort of validation from this breakup. And then, you know, I end up like passing out. I wake up at 7 a.m. And to top things off, I had this tea time at 7 a.m. and I'm like, cool, like this will be like my little like getaway mentally from it. And I go out there, dude, I'm like, I got to drink some water. I'm extremely dehydrated from all that drinking last night. Mm-hmm. And so I go to the driving range. Next thing you know, the caddy comes up to me. He's like, hey, Levi, by the way, you're going to have 3 guys with you. I'm like, oh, dang it. You know, I like playing by myself because then, you know, there's a lot of nerves that comes with that.
True.
These guys traveled the country to like minor league PGA tour,
man.
Right? And so like every other hole, you know, there's a jug of water. And I'm like sitting there under that thing, like just trying to take in as much water as I can. Yeah. And I just quit. And, you know, these guys don't know what I was going through the night before. Yeah. And I wanted to try and make amends with my ex-girlfriend at the time. Okay. And so I call her as I'm leaving Dallas. And I'm actually playing a song called DDID by Trey Lewis. I won't say it on here, but if you know what I'm saying, Annalise knows the song. But anyways, I'm calling my mom. I try to call my ex-girlfriend. I try to make amends, and she's like, yeah, it's like, no. It's not going to be that way.
Okay.
And that's like what led down this road of like that seek. And that's when I went to therapy and all of that. But
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What do you think like brought you out of that the end of the 9 months there?
I'd worked these two really, really bad calls, and a guy had taken his own life. And when I walked into the hotel room, his wife is calling, and The Matrix is playing on the TV, like the beginning of the movie.
Weird, man. That's weird.
And The Matrix is one of my favorite movies, where this whole red pill movement comes from is that movie, like that's the red pill thing right there. Like, you going to take the blue pill and continue to live the lie, or are you going to take the red pill and take the truth? And, but that hit me. I was like, I'll never want my mom to find me like that. And that's life. That the worst situation that I can be in at that time pulled me out. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, I don't have to live like this, and I don't want my family to see me like this. Mm-hmm. And so like, I just got into prayer and, just started praying for a change in my life. And I'm like, dude, I got to read a book. Right. And so I go to Barnes and Noble, and I just prayed before I walked in. I'm like, God, lead me to the book that I need. And there I am, I'm standing at all the stoicism and philosophy stuff, and there's 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. And I'm like, I know that's a good book and maybe something I can pull from and enjoy. So I pull that, and then I look up and boom, there's Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting, title to a book. Is that my problem? And I picked it up, I started reading through it, and it's like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and so on. And I'm just like, okay, this is what I'm getting. Man, I read that book 2 weeks later. I'm about halfway done with it. And this was the true change. I just felt like I need to get away. Now, I need to get away from everything, like, because you're kind of in this like transition mode at this time. That's where I was at, this transitioning. And I need to change. So I need to be out by myself somewhere and just read this book. So I went out to the lake in my hometown, and it's like January, freezing cold, water's frozen over. I build a little fire and take a lawn chair and just sit there and start reading and praying. And, it's just like, God, tell me what to do. Tell me where to go with my life. Cause I don't know, where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what my purpose is, and I want to know it. And I want it to be to glorify you. And like from that moment forward, like the platform blew up, literally, awesome. Dude, I'm not kidding. A week later, I've made one post, and it had 650,000 views. Wow. And then now, like the development of the platform in general, dude, over the last year, we had 175 days worth of listened to content on the Pursuing Truth podcast.
It's awesome.
And what people often don't understand is at the beginning of it was my first 6 months into podcasting was me extremely depressed. And so when they go back and they listen to those old episodes, like, I don't even know how to articulate myself.
Really?
So
like a different person.
Yeah, different person. And so they judge off of that. So like now, because I started that way, I have 0 people in my hometown that support me. I have 0 friends that actually listen and encourage me on the podcast, besides the ones that I've developed from the podcast. Like the podcast has literally became my life, because it's the only thing that truly provides me the purpose, the reason, because in articulation and communication, it's like, dude, I'm speaking to somebody.
Yeah.
And somebody's listening, and somebody's taking something away, and it's changing somebody's life.
And
this isn't a Call Her Daddy podcast. This isn't some type of entertainment podcast. Yeah. This is a podcast for somebody that wants to get better and start finding the meaning and the reasoning in their life, because I had to go there. I had to find that. And so that's what I want to get out of every conversation, And I know I'm talking a lot, dude. And
No. I'm sure that helps you grow too, like speaking through your issues while you're in them, I bet. And it's too bad that everybody didn't support you. Do you think that's like some of the stigma thing that was going on with your hometown, not supporting those years or that period of depression when you were?
Yeah, I think anybody that's from a small town, one of the hardest things about it is that nobody wants to see you do better than potentially them.
I could see
right?
that.
And so you go out and you do something that not everybody is doing. Not everybody's making a podcast, and especially not everybody's making a really deep podcast. Like we could do a sports podcast, we could do a podcast about anything, you know, about
You're being vulnerable and authentic and everything. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, and so like that's what I want to provide the difference of. And so there's not a lot of people that are doing that. And so like these people, I don't know if they're jealous. I don't know if it's just something they're not interested in, or ultimately just because they don't care. And honestly, I think that's more of what it is. A lot of people around us really intrinsically do not care about us. We are just passing time for them. That's it. Like
in your recovery, when you were reading like Aurelius and in the ancient Greeks, and like at the same time.
Hey y'all, we're just going to take a real quick break there. Nathan asked me a really good question about how did I separate ancient philosophy and Stoicism from the Bible? Well, what I did was I compared the Bible to Stoicism, and I tried to align those things. And if it didn't align with the Bible, then I would exclude it. But I think that philosophy brings out a lot of different perspectives and real world application that we can apply into our own lives. And that's where Stoicism impacted me so much. So obviously I'm in the editing phase right now, and I'm watching this and picking up on some of the things that were missed. But we were in a room with multiple people trying to hold a very deep conversation and staying on point. So that's why you get some of this jumping around a little bit. But I hope that you are enjoying the conversation. If you are, please be sure to leave a Apple Podcast review, a rating on Spotify, and subscribe and like the video on YouTube. The best thing that you can possibly do is share this with somebody you think might pull something from this conversation. Thank you all.
Yeah. So what you're seeing right now, and this is really fascinating, what you're seeing right now is just how our minds work when we're in a large group of people. Like you and I are having a very intentional conversation where it's very meaningful, and you don't get that type of intentional conversation with people when you're in a large group because there's so much going on around us, and you're distracted.
Absolutely.
And so you don't get to dig in.
Yeah.
And so you get the small talk, and then they go home and they're still depressed and they're sad and they don't have relationship.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I think, are living for social media too. That's like a fake. The thing I don't understand about social media, the biggest part that I think maybe hurts is like even when you do get praise or you get what you're looking for out of it, it's not really coming to you. It's coming to whatever that profile, that persona you've put forward. So no matter what, you're not really being affirmed for who you really are. It's for that profile, that thing you're putting forward. And I think that's so common for us to rely on that instead of person-to-person interaction. And I don't think COVID helped with it either. People were forced to rely on something like that.
What do you think it was about COVID that made people that way? Was it like the exclusion from people, or?
Yeah, and it's weird because I spent some time in Oregon and in Texas. And I mean, in Oregon right now, they still have mask restrictions where you got to wear them inside and things. So it was totally different being there than here. But I guess in the northern states or, where they had the heavier restrictions, I think that was the biggest thing, was seclusion from people. And people were, down here, I think it was more like, if people were doing the shelter in place or whatever, it's because the law told them to. But in Oregon and things, it was people choosing to be that way. And it was culturally wrong. It was like against norms for you to go out during that time. And so people really were truly restricted and in their homes. And I think there was a heavier reliance on social media or whatever technology to get that face-to-face interaction, that social cohesion. That's more important than we realize for humans. It's related to a whole host of health problems.
So there it showed like no physical interaction, but everybody's on social media talking about what they're doing at home.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect representation of like a lifestyle where somebody spends their life inside of a bedroom or inside of their home. and not a knock against it, but constantly playing video games all the time, and the only interaction you get is on the chat in the video games.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe it's Facebook or Instagram, and it's solely the messaging one another and text messages and phone calls. Like, we need human contact,
Absolutely.
and we're designed for that. You know, one thing that always cracks me up, like every time somebody touches me, I'm like, oh, human touch.
I know, it's like it's back.
Yeah. It's like, oh, this is real, but that's true. That's what we need. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're nurtured that way from a baby,
Absolutely.
right?
And if we lack that, it causes some serious consequences later on with brain development and physical development. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Not
So
having that.
So do you think that
touch.
like, I kind of feel that we're at a turning point right now, you know, moving on from COVID completely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's still the mental health that's lingering from it? Like, or
I think so. I think the biggest problem we're going to find is with young children who were developing during those ages. They're just so susceptible to all sorts of long-term mental disabilities, or not mental disabilities necessarily, but mental illness as a result of their developing years. And so, yeah, not being able to interact with other kids and with their teachers, and like kids being in school with masks on, like we get so much from nonverbal cues from each other's faces. So I can't imagine learning in that situation when you're only in kindergarten or preschool or whatever it is. And on top of that, so much entertainment for children to keep them calm. We just put a screen in front of them.
Absolutely.
And that's going to, I think the instant gratification that they're seeking all the time, I think they're going to have the same, like it's going to be an increase in sort of ADHD problems. There's going to be attention deficit problems, I think. I would only imagine that. I don't think anything else could follow. And yeah, I think with children, I think the next generation coming up, that's where we're going to see the biggest consequence. But I absolutely do think even for our age or older, whoever, being in seclusion for that long definitely isn't healthy. So I'm sure there are people still suffering for it. But one good thing I do think came from it is I think people started paying attention more to mental health, maybe start to erase that stigma that we see with men, with all people really.
Why do you think the male suicide rate is 3 times higher than the female suicide rate?
I would imagine that it's probably because of the stigma of coming out and seeking help. I think not enough men are seeking therapy, and we don't have good enough solutions either. We're definitely lacking in our solutions. Like the antidepressants and things, they hardly work more than they do for a placebo. They've compared them in studies, so it's really just as good as telling someone a sugar pill is going to work. It's really just their own brain doing it.
There's people that need it.
Absolutely. We don't have the answers for it.
But what was it? Something like 150 times more amount of people started taking antidepressants after COVID.
Mm-hmm. I did hear a statistic like
there's
that.
some type of statistic like that. But I also think like this statistics are very subjective, and we have to look at statistics as the study presents itself. And when you look at the statistic, something like, I want to say 60 to 70% of suicides are after the age of 55 for a male. And really, I think what that comes down to is, I mean, you look at that age group, it's the retirement age group.
Yes.
And their whole life, they've spent their time working. And then they retire, or they're put in a nursing home where they're not able to care for themselves. You know, imagine, dude, I can't imagine somebody wiping my butt.
Yeah,
Dude, that's humiliating, and the dignity. Absolutely. And so I think that you talk to an older man that doesn't have a wife, that doesn't have children, and isn't involved in family, and then there's lack of purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think you compare that to maybe the early 30s. I mean, I think that's probably the second highest amount in the suicide rate for men. And I think a lot of that has to do with loneliness and inadequacy, feeling inadequate. Because men are presented different challenges in the world as opposed to women.
No doubt.
And I don't mean this as a misogynist or anything like that, but an attractive woman can walk in the room and own the room just because of the way she looks. An attractive dude walks in the room, he becomes a threat to everybody in the room, besides maybe the women. He becomes a threat to the other men because we run sexually, right? Mm-hmm. That's the way our brains work. And so he becomes a threat. So now, like, how does he develop relationships? How, you know, all of that. There's so much psychology and subjectivity to why the suicide rate is so high. But I think like the 30-year-old male, it's really that loneliness and not having a sense of meaning in their life.
Absolutely. And actually, my therapist had told me something really interesting about, and makes sense with what you're saying about the post 55 age group, is he said, when I was 40 or something like that, and I was with my wife who's younger, when we'd go to the mall, everybody would approach me. They'd like try and sell to me because they knew I was the breadwinner. But after 55, when you're retired and you have a younger wife, they don't care about the man anymore. You're not the provider anymore. And that's a big sense of confidence for men. And that being taken away in that age group, or just in general, I guess, there's a lot more women in higher level education, a lot more women making a lot more money now. And I think that definitely contributes to men's mental health. And I think there needs to be a sort of redefinition, I guess, of how men can be providers or be manly, because reality is shifting where we're not the inherent breadwinners anymore, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And since that's been so tied to masculinity in capitalist society in America, especially, and in the individual aspect, you were saying like men are competing all the time. It's not a cohesive thing. We're trying to one up each other.
Yeah.
And I don't think society helps with that. And I think there needs to be a sort of, I guess, helping, like talking about it is really good. You're talking and giving advice. There needs to be more of that instead of competing all the time, I guess. I think that would be beneficial for all of us.
Well, you're in a culture of like pumping self-esteem, and like it's all about how you feel about yourself. And there's truth to that, absolutely, but that shouldn't be our only focus. And another thing that we're constantly focused on is empathy and compassion, and we're not focused on it's obvious, like we are competitive beings. We're far more competitive than a lot of women out there. I mean, my sisters are not as competitive as me. It's just plain and simple. Yeah. Like it's nothing against women. This is just an evaluation of what I see in the world, and not like a certain person that I feel that way about, even though I just use my sisters as an example. But
and women are typically better at forming social groups and things. We're better at competing one-to-one. That's what we're geared towards. Yeah. But anyway.
But I think this is a good point to take away from this too, is that, like I said, loneliness and meaning. Those are the two reasons why I think the male suicide rate is so high. Loneliness is from not having family relationships or good quality friendships. And meaning is that you find the meaning in those relationships as a man, because we naturally have the proclivity to want to provide, right? So when we look at the disparity in relationships and we're not developing those anymore, this is another thing about, I got two girls in here and it's making me nervous as I'm talking about this, because I do not want to sound like a misogynist to either one of you, because I don't mean this. I'm just trying to articulate my thoughts out loud here, firing from the hip. Okay? But women on their Instagram, they may get 150 DMs, right? And a man is never going to experience that. But imagine that ego boost. And what it also says to her is, I can always find better.
Absolutely.
And then so men have a loss of relationship. It's harder to develop a intimate relationship with a woman than I believe it is for a woman to develop an intimate relationship, because it's predicated on what we can attract, not what they've already attracted, right? An attractive woman has a lot of value in the dating world. That's plain and simple. It doesn't matter what she does. It doesn't matter if she has a kid. At the end of the day, there's a man out there, a good man that has a lot of money that wants her.
Absolutely. Yeah, men definitely, we have less thought going into it. I saw a funny study recently, and it was like how open, when a woman attracts a man, how open are they about wanting sex? And it actually goes up. So like how likely a man is to say yes goes up the more open she is about it. So if she were to just flirt normally or just say hi, there's a lower chance the man's going to say yes to sex. But if she comes out right away saying, I want to have sex with you, very likely. But it's the exact opposite for women. Women are looking for something not that is just our attractiveness, right? It's something, it's like you were saying, owning the room. There's a persona to it. It's not quite as basic as it is for a man being attracted to a woman. And so, yeah, women do have a lot easier time finding a guy, not necessarily finding the guy, I'd say. But finding options for sure. And I think we all suffer from it with dating apps, where we could never really settle if you have a dating app, right? It's like we know there's something better you could be talking to right now. And constantly trying to optimize every part of our lives is not really good for you. It's I don't think that making the world bigger in terms of like our love lives is necessarily beneficial to us, any of us. And but it does work in an inverse way, like you were saying, which is kind of weird. It's going to increase for women and maybe decrease some for men when you expose yourself to the whole
and
world.
then you look at it, and an attractive woman can have 150 followers on her Instagram and still like have a bunch of dudes in the DMs. A guy with 150 followers, he's seen as low value, at least in the social world of social media, right? Like, come on, like we base value on that, right? And there's so much to it, and I think as we talk about it, as a culture, it's not really broke down the way that we're talking about it. What else should we talk about?
Well, one of the things that I think is the biggest problems, and one of the things I'd like to work with, is child development and training parents to be better parents. And I'm trying to learn about that right now, because I think what they found with, they call them adverse childhood experiences, and they'll do a score where an adverse childhood experience is like violence or neglect or seeing violence, seeing your parent being incarcerated or something like that. But it's very extreme experiences. But we find that they're very common in America. Lots of people have experienced at least one, and then there's a subgroup, a smaller group that's experienced many. And the more you experience, the more likely you're going to have all sorts of physical and mental problems. So the more likely you are to develop, to catch hepatitis, to have heart disease, to have depression is huge. I think it's like 12 times as likely just by having one adverse childhood event, which is just amazing. Wow. And the biggest problem is that it's happening to children, and we don't put all that much effort or money into schools. We don't monitor parents. Not that parents need to be monitored necessarily, but like if a child is suffering, that should be part of the therapy, is working with the entire family, not just the child.
So what would be your solution to that?
I think being very involved in, I think it would be two parts. It would be educating children and parents, and then on the other hand, shaping the school system differently. I think the biggest problem with the school system is how big class sizes are. I don't think a teacher can really attend to or wants to attend to all 30 students individually. And if you could shrink that size down to 10, they could really get in touch with what's going on at home, how to teach them the best way they can.
Right. You look at the beginning of the public school system, it was like local neighborhood schoolhouses where you only had like 10, 20 kids, maybe max.
Yeah, and a very close relationship, very intimate, where they know exactly those child's needs. Right. I think that's always the best way, is to just look at each person as an individual and treat their individual needs. Right. And I don't think it's quite possible with the school system we have right now.
Now, I want to run down this and just conversate about it just openly. So as a Christian, and I'm not going to play it down, I'm a conservative, and I think it's important to have these conversations to kind of understand, why is there that difference in us? And I'm not saying like you're liberal or whatever. I'm not assuming anything. I'm just saying in general to the listener, that do you believe that it would be a system responsibility to teach parents how to be essentially better parents?
System meaning the government?
Yeah.
No, I have some pretty atypical views, I would say, with politics. I don't really align with any sort of position. I think government as a whole is bad. I wouldn't want the government being in charge of, because it changes every 4 years or 2 years even, the House and Senate. So who knows who's going to be deciding what to teach parents when.
Right.
I think it should be totally dependent upon parents seeking that out themselves. Right. And so I think the key is to educate parents to seek that. So I think if we could show just how extreme these childhood experiences can affect their later lives, I think parents care about their children, and they'll seek out the education to help their own children.
Right.
And that's what I would want it to be. I don't want it to be a mandatory thing. I want it to be something where the science is so clear, and it's not a right or left issue. It's just you want your kids to be as healthy as they can and have the best lives they can. So I'm going to seek that education by myself.
Right. Well, I'm just going to throw this out here. We know that the science is clear that once a person finds meaning and purpose in their life, that the likelihood of depression for long term is decreased significantly. We know that. And even though we know the science to be true, people still don't make that decision to be like, well, how do I find that purpose and start looking for it? And so like, although there's the problem, like people don't want to deal with the problems because truth hurts, right? Naturally it hurts. And it's one of the reasons why to some people, maybe from my hometown, that this whole podcast, it's in its name, Pursuing Truth, is that we dig into these topics and we find these things. It's unpopular because there's some things that are said at times that are going to be things that you don't agree with, and that we're all different people. And so like there's this individuality that each one of us have. And so like I 100% agree with you. It's not a collective responsibility, it's an individual responsibility. You know, I was even thinking about this. I have a Bumble, okay? I go around on there and you know, here's what I say for dating is like, put yourself out there, put the bobber in the pond, and, you know, just see what happens.
Sure.
But don't like expect to get something out of it either.
Sure.
You know, don't pursue so much as just, you know, I'm here, but I don't gotta have it either.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
that's I think that's a good, healthy mental place to be as you approach online dating.
Yeah, you'll be okay without it. You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, I may say, hey, you know, how's your day or whatever to a girl, and like be completely content with the rejection.
Yeah, and that's very hard for me, but that's kudos to you for being able to do it. That's rough.
I test rejection. I mean, like, look at last night. Like, I'm walking up to almost any girl that I find attractive, and I'm just like trying to have a general conversation with them.
Yeah.
I'm open to the rejection. Because the more that I become okay with rejection, the more that I become okay with me just being me, because I know at the end of the day, as a man, I'm going to be rejected all the time. And so rejection is hard. And it was like, what's wrong with me? Like, I know I'm an attractive dude. I know that the list goes on as to a reason why I think that a woman would want to date me, but it's obviously something that I cannot understand.
Yeah, it's more about them than it is about you.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard is it's when someone reacts to you a certain way, don't necessarily think it's you. They got things going on in their own lives. There's a reason why you might reject a girl one day and not another, right? It's whatever is going on at that moment.
Right.
And that's one thing they call the fundamental attribution error, is that we tend to attribute other things to who people are. So if a person rejects you, we're going to say, oh, well, that's because that person doesn't like me. Mm-hmm. But if it was ourselves, we would say, you know, I wasn't feeling good that day, whatever it is. The circumstances are more important. And we do that a lot for bad things that happen to other people. So if someone loses their job and ends up homeless, we'll say that's because they're not a hard enough worker. But if it were to happen to us, we would think of all the numerous circumstances, right, that led to that. And I think that's really important to understanding other people, is that we don't know. Like that quick judgment probably isn't right. There's probably a whole lot of things going on that you need to consider.
Yeah. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, go into the world with your shoulders back and head high, and
stay that way regardless. Yeah. Because that's who you are. Yeah.
Own who you are, because what makes you who you are, I think, is where you find meaning. Like, you want to know yourself, dig into the, man, why do I think this like bad thoughts sometimes? Not necessarily about myself, but other people around me.
Mm-hmm.
When you start asking yourself those questions, then you start to become aware of, you know, maybe what triggers you. And if it triggers you, how do I get my mindset out of that? It's like, I was recently talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about how they really dislike this person. And I asked them, you know, what is it that you dislike about that? I don't know. Oftentimes we do that, right? It's like we don't know why we dislike them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that we find why, the meanings behind the reasons why we feel the way we do, because then it says something to us, you know, of, okay, maybe I need to reevaluate, have some grace, have some mercy with people.
Absolutely. In my experience, it always comes back to something with me. When I have a negative thought about somebody else, it's usually somewhere in me I got an insecurity. That's like a trigger for me. Now that's just kind of what I assume is like, when I think like, oh, I really hate that guy, I like think, oh, it's probably something in me and I got to figure it out. But it almost always is. It's almost always your own insecurity. It's not being confident in yourself.
Right. And this is one reason why I always talk about personal responsibility. As a man, own it. Own it. Own who you are. Be confident with it. And all of these issues in life, once we start evaluating, those meanings and the reasons, then the suicide rate decreases. I mean, really. And that sounds so simplistic, but obviously it wasn't simplistic to come to that conclusion. I had to go through it.
Yeah.
You know, and I had to talk about it. And then I had to listen to myself talk about it. And then I had to be like, you sound like an idiot there. And the list goes on.
That's how
like,
it goes, yeah.
Like you have to go through it.
Yeah.
And then you own it. And then you're not like upset about it anymore. You're just like, okay, cool. Now what's next? It's that constant growth.
Absolutely.
And then so once you have that, you have a direction to go towards.
Yeah. You got a light at the end of the tunnel instead of just being in the pit. Yeah. And talking about it, writing it down, whatever, you start to realize how kind of crazy you sound in your head. Because when it's just replaying on repeat, it's hard to tell. It's like all you have. It's just constant monologue. And so, that's why even if it's just talking to yourself or writing it down for yourself, I think laying it out for you to see it with your eyes or hear with your ears instead of just inside your own head, I think that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Well, should we wrap it up?
It sounds like a good place.
Dude, I think it was good. You know, there were quite a few distractions for us in there. And it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just kind of where we're at and what we're doing. You know, it's not my normal studio.
For sure.
So we're not going to have the seclusion. At my house, we would have dogs barking in the background. So we didn't have that. We had a couple meows.
Yeah, we did.
But it was an awesome time, dude. Getting you on. I appreciate you just being open to it, dude, because I was happy the way it turned out.
Great.
And I think that somebody's going to be able to take away from it, which is ultimately what I want for you guys as listeners, is to take something from the conversations that we're having, that you do find that meaning in your purpose in your life, so that it's not so hard, because life is a war and you got to show up to the war and you got to be ready for the battle. And you got to develop people around you that are teammates with you, that are willing to go to war with you. And that's the essence of friendship. That's the essence of relationship. And that's the meaning of life, is for us to develop relationships. But dude, thank you so much for coming on to the Pursuing Truth podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was a good time.
Absolutely. All right. If you guys would give us a rating on Spotify, give us a Apple Podcast review, subscribe on YouTube, and go follow us on all of the social media outlets, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you name it. We're there. Pursuing Truth podcast. You guys stay safe and God bless.